You're listening to DMCs with Lolo Mhaga, where I sit down with interesting people who have interesting things to say. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Good day and welcome, my dear friends, to another installment of DMCs with myself, Lolo Mhaga. Now, for our new listeners or for the older parts of our audience that prefer to speak in full sentences, DMCs means deep, meaningful conversation, which I shall endeavor to do with some real movers and shakers in our world. Get down to the heart, the meat of their views and what they have to say. And we could not be any more luckier, any more blessed than to have this incredible woman joining us today. Not only are her actions and those of the country that she is representing shaping history and changing the way it unfolds before our eyes. Her Excellency, thank you so much, Madam Ambassador of Ukraine to Botswana, Mozambique, and South Africa. I know you're an incredibly busy woman. I thank you for sitting down and talking to me today.
Good day, Lolo. Thank you. Thank you for this introduction.
That's lovely. So we like to get right into your views as quick as possible. So I just have a brief introduction that I'll give just for the sake of our viewers. If there's anything that I might miss out on, please feel free to add on before we get stuck into the questions. So Madam Ambassador graduated with a BA in International Relations from Odessa National University, as well as a master's in European Security Issues from the University of Geneva. She entered the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2003, serving overseas tours in Canada, Belgium, and Switzerland, whilst also serving as a press attaché from 2007 to 2009. Madam Ambassador, you've also served as a counselor to the Middle East and Africa for your Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And from what I understand, you assumed your current role as Ambassador of Ukraine to Botswana, South Africa, and Mozambique in 2017. Am I correct about that?
Not really. I arrived to the Embassy of Ukraine in South Africa as a counselor on political issues. And only in 2020, I was upgraded as ambassador, though since 2017, most of the time, I was performing as the acting ambassador.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So you officially got the role in 2020, but from 2017, yes, you were acting, but joined the ministry earlier, working as a counselor in the ministry. Oh, lovely to hear. So if I look at what you studied in your career in general, it seems like you've always had sight towards diplomacy, international relations, security issues. That seems to be what you sort of look to focus on. Was it always an interest of yours to go into the diplomatic field?
Yes, it always was my interest. And I was studied at the University and Faculty of International Relations. And of course, not always people are ending up serving in diplomatic service, but in my particular case, it happened, and it was definitely my goal. Maybe it was not the goal to become the ambassador, but the belief in diplomacy and solutions of any problem through diplomatic way. Yes, I believe in this.
That's perhaps an interesting question for us to touch on. I mean, considering the diplomatic efforts that were tried to avoid the current conflict, Russia's invasion unprovoked of your country, I wonder, do you still feel that diplomacy can perhaps achieve the kind of aims that you require, considering what we've seen, how regardless of diplomatic efforts, the Russian president and his military have proceeded on course, and nothing really could be offered to him to change that?
Yes, before the invasion started, the war of Russia in Ukraine started in 2014.
Certainly.
And we were trying our best to find a solution through diplomatic channels, believing in multilateralism. We were using platforms of international organizations. Unfortunately, that's something that didn't work, but it's like in tango, both sides have to dance. It's not only for Ukraine to will and to want to resolve the issue with diplomatic solution. Obviously, that Russia demonstrates with all its means that it's not willing today to sit at the table of negotiations. Our president was calling for the President Putin many, many times to sit at the table, but seems that Russia is playing their own game. Our main will is to stop this war, stop Russia of killing our civilians and our people, destroying our infrastructure. So any war sooner or later comes to the end. And the only way to put the sustainable peace and security for the country and for the region and for the world is definitely the diplomatic effort. So yes, I believe in this.
I certainly understand what you're saying regarding the only way to have a real sustained peace would be through diplomatic efforts. And perhaps regardless of the inability for diplomacy to avoid the war, I still see an important part at the end, like you said. And that's quite an interesting idea you brought up, because South Africa often mentions that, you know, for there to be this lasting peace, Russia's considerations and security concerns have to be really thought about and taken into consideration. And I'm just curious, what are your views in that regard? Do you see that there can be a diplomatic path towards appeasing Russia to some extent, so to end the conflict? As to be honest, there's only one country invading another.
You see, when you speak about security guarantees, you have to understand that no one was threatening Russia ever. And it's really, well, I cannot say funny because it's already not funny, but it's very interesting to follow those countries who are pushing this narrative, saying that Russia has to receive its security guarantees. NATO was never the threat to Russia. European Union never was a threat to Russia. Ukraine itself never was a threat to Russia. Georgia, where Russia invaded 20% of the country, of the territory in 2008, never was threatening. A small Georgia never was threatening to Russia. And the actions of the country that is coming to another sovereign state and invading the country, taking over the integral part or parts of another country, making war on the territory of another country. I think this is something that is not discussable and doesn't need any approvals today. Already the world seen the actions and methods that Russia is using. A lot of countries already recognize the actions of Russian army as a genocide against Ukraine. So you have to see the roots of this much deeper. And just to put headlines on this topic saying that someone is threatening Russia, and that is why are we justifying that the country, even if it would be under some threatening, would be that a solution in the 21st century to one country to invade another country? I don't think so. And what kind of precedent you are establish if you are looking silently at this? Will you be looking silently if one neighboring country in Africa will invade another?
I think that's definitely a question that this African government has to ask itself. And to many extents, it feels like they are turning their back on a lot of the values that supposedly the country is founded on, for a more realpolitik view of the situation. And you know, I recently actually watched a debate on the conflict, and a lot of the people arguing this point of view, they were coming at it from a more realist perspective in terms of international relations, sort of saying, unfortunately, Ukraine has a giant bear on its border right next to it. And when you have a giant bear right next to you, you have to act in certain ways, or else if it's afraid, it will lash out in ways that can be devastating. And essentially what a lot of these proponents argue, I think one would be like Professor John Mersheimer, they say that Ukraine has to make some concessions in order for this conflict to end. What do you say to people who offer that kind of way forward to ending the conflict?
I will say very primitive but very true thing to you, maybe not diplomatic one. What part of South Africa would you like to give up in order to feel yourself in a safer place as a citizen, as a country, but differently? Imagine all your body and you are putting to the fire just your leg, or maybe not a leg, a toe. Is it hurts to all body? Yes, it does. So this is the same thing. You have your integral country, you have it independent, sovereign, and what kind of international law is that people studying in order even to offer us this type of solutions? And then again, I'm coming to the point, what kind of precedents it will bring to the world? Will it make it safer? We see not only the international law violations, we see not only the United Nations Charter violations, the basic norms of democracy are violated. And those who are trying to put the solution through the territorial disintegration or territorial abundance of some parts of Ukraine, they're already looking at some small part of this war. They are not looking at what was happening since 2014 and since 24th of February particularly. It's already too far that Russia came in, and it's something that threatens not only to Ukraine already, not only to the region, it threatens to all the world, and it has its repercussions, it has its effects already to the world. And for me, it's very clear that, for example, by making blockade and blockaging our ports and our ships with agricultural commodities, Russia deliberately establishing famine in Africa, deliberately. And when this particular people offering you this kind of solution, you have to ask them this issue, this question. Maybe they will better find solution how to unblock Ukrainian ports. Maybe they have some influence or ideas for Russia better to really solve this issue. But for you, it's more general. For us, it's every day. Our people are dying. Our infrastructure, roads, agricultural sector being destroyed. Our economy is destroyed. We are very much relying today on the assistance of all the partners of the world. And I think that this kind of support that we already have, really unprecedented support, overwhelming one, is coming not because only these violations are happening and countries are willing to adhere to the rules that they set up earlier and that they agreed to respect, but because they realized that Ukrainians are fighting today for all the democratic world. We are fighting today against not the country as Russia, we are fighting against the autocratic regime. The democracy is fighting with non-democracy. And I think that if, or let me put it this way, when we win this war and Russia and its regime will fail, and if it will be able to become a democratic state, I think all the world will win, including South Africa. We will win both because we will get back our territories, but as in one African proverb, you say that you cannot change your neighbors. We neither can do this. So the only solution for us is to see finally the democratic regime, then the world will be better.
What's quite fascinating, you mentioned with some certitude and fortitude that Ukraine will win the conflict. And a lot of the time when Russia has lost a major conflict, there have been quite a lot of major reforms in the country. I think back to, for example, the Sino-Russian War, where the Japanese defeated them, and that marked the end of the Tsar and the Imperial Russia. So I certainly see, perhaps, in this push by the democratic nations of the West and aiding and assisting Ukraine and Ukraine's incredible fight and just pushing back this behemoth Russia, we might actually come up with some good at the end should the conflict come out on the side of
but
Ukraine.
Lolo, let me correct you, because this is kind of perception that maybe our viewers also have, that only West is helping to Ukraine today, which is not true.
Yeah.
As we've seen during the very first vote in the United Nations, 141 countries supported Ukraine. It's not that they were looking how the situation would develop. It's in the beginning of the invasion, they condemned Russia and they said altogether that it must withdraw their troops from the sovereign territory of Ukraine. And the sanctions that are in place today, they are imposed not only by West. What about Australia? What about Japan? What about South Korea? And many, many others. How many big companies withdrawn their businesses from Russia today?
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the global ones like Siemens or Samsung or McDonald's that closed all their activities there. A lot of smaller companies decided like that because they just don't want really be associated anymore with that particular undemocratic regime. It damages their image.
And I think we've even seen some South African companies winding down their operations. I know Barloworld, for all intents and purposes, abandoned and sold off those operations. So I think, although the South African government might not necessarily be on the right side of history, there certainly are some players in the private sector and civil society, such as Gift of the Givers, from what I understand, who have also donated quite a bit to Ukraine's struggle, that have shown the South African government the route that should be taken, how we stick to our values. I wonder what we've sort of seen it playing out in the media, sort of the back and forth with some of the officials in the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. And our president has also recently spoken to Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky. And recently, it was also brought up in Chancellor Scholz's visit about South Africa's stance. What sort of reasons have been given to you for this so-called neutrality?
Well, we all know these reasons: the non-alignment and the call to the United Nations that it has to play its crucial and decisive role in the solution of any conflict. Yes, we also believe that UN and United Nations Security Council must be more efficient. But when you appear in circumstances as you appear as Ukraine today, then you are not sitting and waiting when the United Nations will reform itself, or I don't know what's going to happen. You know that Russia is playing very destructive role in the United Nations, being the holder of the permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. And not many people really know that Russia never put its signature as the country to the United Nations Charter, or as requiring or demanding the place in the United Nations. It's only the USSR and Ukrainian Soviet Republic that had their signatures there. So it's very disputable whether Russia at all has the right to represent or to hold the permanent seat in the UN Security Council. But this is something that definitely will be on the table and will be discussed. It's the same thing like when USSR collapsed and why Russia was still having this big impact in African countries. It's not because it, as a Moscow, was helping with anti-apartheid struggle or anti-colonialism struggle. It was 15 countries, and each of them had and made its input. But Russia stayed present on the ground in many, many countries just by, sorry for saying that, but stealing the embassies through all the Africa. After USSR, they were keeping the embassies and putting the Russian flag there. And I think it's something that also on certain stage will be questioned. Today, when Russia made so many destructions on Ukrainian land, after our victory, we will do all possible that Russia pay to everything and restore everything that it collapsed. But here, the scope of the actions, the numbers, and the terrible atrocities that are happening, the scope of consequences to the world, these effects are really bringing this war on kind of different level. And let's not forget that the previous two world wars started in Europe. Let's not forget that this is the first ever situation when a nuclear power is attacking non-nuclear power, which gave up its nuclear arsenal, the third largest in the world.
With some security guarantees.
On some security guarantees.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge for the future security environment and infrastructure of the world.
And that's quite a sobering note for us, perhaps, to end off there. But before we finish our conversation, as I see we are running out of time, I'll perhaps like to change tack slightly and talk a bit about some lessons Ukraine might have for South Africa. So I know sort of in the build-up to this conflict, one of the reasons why Russia intervened felt that Ukraine was shifting closer towards the West, especially after the Maidan revolution and former President Viktor Yanukovych having to flee as his party sort of deserted him, and the further corruption and just downright horrible governance became more and more exposed. And as I've looked more into this, I've seen interesting responses to this prior corruption that Ukraine has done. I mean, for example, set up a special court specifically for corruption cases. I know there's also an interesting software that was created for public procurement to make it just try and make it accountable and transparent, so all can see exactly what government is purchasing, what quantities, and for what purpose. I'm just wondering, how did Ukraine sort of make this shift, turn this corner to take these concrete actions towards tackling what had been a serious problem of corruption prior, and to perhaps have any lessons or advice for South Africa that we might be able to take on ourselves too, to pursue a similar route?
It's a very difficult but important question, and thank you for this. I will bring it a little bit to another corner, because the issue of corruption is the problem for many, many countries of the world, and it was the issue for my country. And everyone during the election campaign definitely will put this as one of the goals, to eliminate corruption in his country or in her country. The measures and the instruments, tools to do this can be very different. And Ukraine choose this path because we really had an aspiration to become the EU member. And if you want to become an EU member, you had to undergo through different reforms. And anti-corruption reform or judicial reform was, and I think have been, one of the most difficult ones, and it will be for any society. We were undergoing through these reforms for more than 8 years before the invasion started. And yes, we were using different softwares, and European Union was giving their expertise and their hand in order to help us. And I think we performed quite well. The special commissions were visiting to check how the system was effective or not. The goal, why you are doing this, it is important to eliminate corruption. When the government has its higher goal, the aim that they want to achieve, then all the countries watching how this reform is implemented. I'm not sure whether we can use an examples of each other, because I really believe that every particular situation is very unique. But as a showcase, I hope we will be able one time to demonstrate from the point A to the point Z that yes, we undergone through this and we have this particular result. That's how we did it. And I'm sure that it will be one of the cases that we one day will be sharing with the world. We, though, have a lot of things to learn from our history and from the history of each other. But the environment is changing and circumstances. You cannot make application 100% from one scenario to another. That is why we have those platforms of different institutes, researchers, and this is their job to sit and find similarities and how they can be applicable to each other. I believe that when the war's finished, we definitely can establish the link and ties between this kind of research platforms between South Africa and Ukraine.
I think that'll be very, very useful. As I mean, you've lived in this country, you've seen the scourge that corruption is, and just how devastating it's been on its people. And I think there's a real lesson to be learned from Ukraine. I mean, just as a little funny side note, I know, for example, former President Yanukovych's palace is now like a tourist destination of sorts, where people go to take photos and, just to show the absurdity of it. And if we could sort of face it straight up the way Ukraine has and take concrete actions, I can certainly see us turning the corner in a similar manner. But unfortunately, Ambassador, I think that's all the time we have for today. I really, really thank you for what was not only an enlightening and sobering conversation, but also hopeful, because you spoke about you believe your country will prevail, and you spoke about the kind of future that we should craft going forward afterwards. And you have my full-hearted support. I am a deep believer in the struggle of the Ukrainian people. I will continue to speak out and shape opinion for the positive. But I thank you for giving me some of your time today.
Thank you very much. And let me use this opportunity to congratulate you and all your listeners and viewers with Africa Day. Happy Africa Day. I really hope that Russia did what they didn't anticipate, that they put Ukraine on the map of Africa, and that we have huge perspectives for our countries to make the life of our people better.
I agree. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.